So why does it seem that our political leaders, those people who appear to be basically in charge of everything, why do they always seem to be so out of touch? Why do they always seem to make dumb decisions? In fact, why do they champion causes that very few regular Americans consider a priority? And at the very same time, they also downplay the real concerns that regular people seem to have in their daily lives. They can't be that stupid, can they? Are they really that far out of touch from the average person? Well, the answer, which doesn't come as a surprise to those of us who interact with these guys, unfortunately, is yes, they really are completely out of touch with the rest of us. Now, there was a recent study and some interesting survey results that clearly indicate our political elite are indeed completely out of touch and disconnected from the realities that I think most of us experience. I believe this is fascinating and it merits a lot more attention than it's very likely to receive from the government-approved corporate media because, after all, this isn't the reality that they want to face. Yet I believe that we need to recognize it, understand it, and find a solution to this chasm of reality between our political elites and the rest of us. And the reality, I believe, is that this chasm has grown so wide that our elite in America barely live in the same world that the rest of us inhabit. And this is not good for public policy or our future if we can't bridge this chasm, of course, with some check and balance. Now, in a recent paper released by the Committee to Unleash Prosperity that was titled Them versus Us, and I've kind of linked to the original report down below in the video description, and I'm going to actually quote from their report here, which states that the survey is a first-of-its-kind look at the views of the American elite, defined as people having at least one postgraduate degree, earning at least $150,000 annually, and living in high population density areas, more than 10,000 people per square mile in their zip code, and compares them to what the average American thinks. The elites represent 1% of the U.S. population, but they have an outsized voice on public policy in the United States, with their views seeming somehow to dominate the national conversation. That's end of quote. Now, I will further quote from this report because there is a partisan nuance that should be addressed just head on here. And I believe this report states in the beginning, in reference to their study participants and in reference to the kind of out-of-touch nature of our elites, and I'm going to quote again here, this is true even when the elites self-identify as Republicans. They typically may be more conservative than elite Democrats, but they still have attitudes and opinions that are very far removed from those of the typical American voter. The elite class, regardless of party, is an exclusive club that sees and experiences America through a different lens than ordinary Americans, and that's unquote. Now, this group used Rasmussen to conduct this survey and interviewing about 1,000 people who would be defined as elite by income over 150K, having a postgraduate degree, and then living in a metropolitan area. By partisan affiliation, they do self-report as 73% Democrat and 14% Republicans. And what I found unusual about this report was that they also segregated the results by those specifically who had an Ivy League education, which they defined in this report as not just the Ivy League schools, plus a few others like Stanford and some other elite educational institutions. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I want to inform my viewers that despite growing up obviously poor and working as a dishwasher, a cabinet builder, a paper boy in my high school days, in a weird series of circumstances, I am guilty of graduating from an Ivy League college myself. It was actually Columbia University in New York City back in the early 1990s. Now, I was clearly a charity case, kind of a work-study student, and by the way, this is an easy fact for anybody to verify because Columbia has put all of their college newspapers online, and you can actually find hundreds of references to me from that time, either as a runner on the cross-country or the track team, or as a political activist bringing speakers like Dinesh D'Souza to campus or organizing outdoor barbecues next to leftist hunger strikes. Now, when I first started getting politically active again in my community about 14 years ago, the local Democrat Party chair at the time couldn't believe that I really went to Columbia, and they were stunned to dig into my background and find out that, yes, I actually really did go there. Now, this report interests me because it appears to actually reflect exactly the disconnect that I witnessed between myself and most, not all. I mean, some of us were full-time, full-rides type students, full-ride scholarship students, but most of my fellow students who attended the same school, and this is why I'm not surprised at the massive chasm and disconnect between regular Americans and those who graduate from institutions like Columbia or Harvard or Yale, et cetera. And these people, my fellow classmates, they often graduate to run our government or businesses, Wall Street, most high-tech companies today, most higher education institutions, and certainly most of corporate media today. By their status, their power, money, and control, they are clearly the political elite that most of us would recognize today. Now, no surprise when asked the question, are your personal finances getting better or worse? Look at the difference right here on the charts shown here. 80% of average Americans say that their personal finances are either getting worse, which is the red slice, or same not sure if it's the gray slice. Now look at the significant contrast with the Ivy League grads, where 12% say they're either worse or the same. I mean, listen, this isn't even just a slight variation. This is a massive difference in worldview and experience. So the average American is concerned about the economy because of their personal experience and probably the experiences that they're witnessing all around them. However, the Ivy League grads believe everything's going great for them and their friends. I mean, this is a major disconnect. And it's no wonder that so many of our elites have said recently in the corporate media that they believe Americans are not responding to the awesome Biden economy. I mean, these people are saying this. They're not all pathological liars. Some of them genuinely have no idea what is actually happening to average Americans right now. Now, unfortunately, this disconnect, I think, gets even more shocking and worse when you look at other questions that they asked. For example, when they asked if the United States provides too much individual freedom, only 16% of regular Americans think so. But a shocking 55% of Ivy League graduates believe that we just have too much individual freedom in America. It is actually the red slice in the survey here. And I personally find this divide terrifying because those of us who care about freedom and liberty must realize that our elites who run nearly every government institution in America, they're run by people who clearly want to take away more of our freedom and our liberty. And this survey supports the policies and actions that we're witnessing our government take today. And here's where the divide really becomes more shocking and nasty. When asked to fight climate change, would you support the rationing of meat, gas, and electricity? Look at the red slice in the survey pie here. 89% of Ivy League graduates would support that idea. And clearly a majority of Americans, as regular Americans, would oppose it. Is it any wonder that we are seeing insane ideas like tearing out our dams, banning gas stoves, metering your water, and jacking up the cost of farming as ideas promoted by our out-of-touch elites who believe that they will not be impacted by these policies, probably rightly. They are essentially pushing these ideas on the rest of us peasants, and they just don't care. It is this type of worldview that promotes these types of policies, and this is why it seems so out of touch with the rest of us. Now, also no surprise, they surveyed this group of elites and they wanted to know how positively they viewed certain categories of people: lawyers, union leaders, journalists, members of Congress. Now, the gray column here is the Ivy League elite. This is basically, they love all these groups. And the blue column represents regular Americans' views. Now, to me, the biggest disconnect is with members of Congress, where only 28% of regular Americans positively view members of Congress. But of course, the Ivy League elite have an 86% favorable view of congressmen. And of course they do. Most of the members of Congress are their former classmates and their friends. Now, and finally, this is really the last result that I'm going to discuss here as part of the survey, which is to fight climate change, of course. Would you favor banning the following? And then the survey, they basically asked about banning gas stoves, cars, air travel, SUVs, air conditioning. And again, the Ivy League elite are willing to ban everything, figuring that it's not going to impact them. And the regular people clearly don't want that. I mean, surprise, surprise. So now listen, I know that not everyone who attends an Ivy League school or who is wealthy is this out of touch. But most of them clearly live in their own bubble compared to the rest of us. Their kids don't attend the same schools, they live in different neighborhoods, and they take very different vacations, and they logically tend to congregate with people who basically do the same. And by itself, this is sort of to be expected. I mean, the problem, though, that we're witnessing, which I believe represents a real challenge to our nation and certainly to our public policy, is that the people who are normally or nominally in charge of everything, they just have no common reference point with the rest of us. And frankly, the rest of us are the people who are most likely to be impacted by these policies. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of examples that stand out in my own life and my own experience attending and graduating from Columbia. Now, first, when I discuss topics like hunting, growing my own food on our farm, shoveling manure out of a horse pasture, repairing a bulldozer, replacing our roof, or just changing the oil on my beater car at home, these really sounded like exotic stories to most of my classmates. I mean, they often looked at me like they had no idea what I was actually talking about. And in fact, my junior year, a fellow cross-country runner from California, he and I decided to save the cost of an airplane, basically airplane tickets home, and then shipping our stuff home that summer. And we chose to purchase a $1 car, and we wanted to fix it up to drive across the country. Now, my friend grew up in similar circumstances to me, so we both thought that we could make this happen. We towed this early 1980s Subaru, kind of looked like this right here, near our dorm room in Manhattan. And my mom shipped my tools out to me, and we went down to replace the motor on this crappy car, which included buying a no questions asked engine from Staten Island. Don't recommend that. And matching some parts in the engineering lab to make it all work. We had to machine our own parts. Now, that is when I discovered that you can't have an engine in your dorm room, which is a rule that no previous student at Columbia had apparently ever violated before. Now, this was quite an adventure. Our car was broken into multiple times, of course. It was Manhattan in the early 90s. My tools were stolen, but we got the Subaru running, stuffed it with all of our worldly possessions, plus we strapped bags on the roof. And while we broke down several times on our way back to the West Coast, we rebuilt the carburetor once, for example, and then I had to hitchhike in New Jersey for half a day to find a replacement distributor. We did manage to make it home. Now, we didn't really save much money doing it, but it never occurred to us that we couldn't make it happen. And that summer, I got a commercial truck driving job in Washington State to make money for the next year. Now, when I came back for my senior year, our fellow students at Columbia couldn't even conceive of doing such a strange thing, and they thought my friend and I were crazy. I mean, none of them had really used hand tools to work on a car, and their life experiences were so different that to them, everything about my life and upbringing just seemed exotic and strange to them. Now, many of them couldn't understand why I was a conservative political activist on campus, why I cared about freedom and liberty back then. I mean, they couldn't understand why I wrote a column in the school's newspaper opposing Reagan's national so-called assault weapons ban, or how I could want to shrink the size of the government. Now listen, these elites surveyed in this report, including the Ivy League elites, are not necessarily stupid people. Some of them certainly are, but probably not most of them. They just live in this isolated bubble, disconnected from what the rest of us experience. They basically know we exist out here as some type of kind of generic masses that they've caricaturized in some type of cartoonish way with our guns, our trucks, our flag, and our votes for people that they don't like. I mean, not just Donald Trump. But this self-imposed isolation and bubble is an inevitable outcome of stratifying in basically these same schools, the wine and cheese crowd, the same boardrooms, and the same political events that they all go to. Eventually, this recent survey clearly indicates that their worldview is almost polar opposite to the rest of us. Now, this really wouldn't matter except for the fact that these people are essentially in charge of everything, and their policy decisions and this disconnected belief system, this ensures conflict with the rest of us, as their worldviews only continue to diverge from ours. And this is why they don't care about the increasing crime. I mean, it really hardly impacts them in their gated communities. I mean, they don't care about gun restrictions. They like them because they have armed security to protect them. They don't really care about illegal immigration. I mean, they actually view that as a positive way to reduce their costs of living, maybe their lawn maintenance and other lifestyle benefits. They don't lose their jobs when a pandemic happens, and they don't have to deal with a collapsing public education system that no longer prioritizes even basic literacy. They aren't concerned about more pointless and endless wars because it isn't like their kids are enlisted in the military. Now, our elites promise kind of feel-good, virtue-signaling causes like saving the planet from the terrifying consequences of climate change, no matter how much their policies increase the cost of living or create corrupt government grant-grifting operations, because it really doesn't impact them. They support taking away your car, your SUV, your meat, and your home because it's not going to hurt them. They can put up a rainbow flag and pretend to care about whatever it is they're told to care about. And they can pretend that the rest of us essentially just plain don't exist. Except, of course, we do exist, and the average person's waking up. I mean, one part of this survey was interesting to me, and the elite spend a lot more time talking about politics than the average person. And I actually think that when that begins to change, when the average person starts to suffer more and more as a direct result of the policy choices that these same elites try to basically ram down our throats. I don't believe this is sustainable right now. And in fact, course corrections are inevitable in societies where the elite drift this far out of touch and with just completely out of touch compared to regular people. They may want to censor us, to silence us, or pretend that we don't exist. But history clearly shows that this is a short-sighted choice, and it's only going to backfire. Now, I really believe that we're in for significant change in the near future. I can't predict when or exactly what it will look like, but this type of disconnect by our political and basically media and university class of elites, it's going to blow up. However, we should remain engaged in this process because when rapid change happens, it's no guarantee that the next iteration of our elite class of leadership is going to be much better. If you happen to be around people who seem to fit into this disconnected elite status, try talking to them and kind of let them know your concerns and real-world challenges. You never know when you can actually have an impact on the choices that they make. In the end, we all have to deal with the consequences of our situation. We can't escape this. There's no escape. We can only do our best to make an impact on our communities, our state, and our nation by organizing right now, I believe. And of course, educating ourselves and showing up today. Because in the end, as I always say, the future always belongs to those who show up. And the elite don't seem to be realizing that we're going to have to be showing up.